Exceptions happen in any application, and your API will definitely not be the exception. Get the pun? Exception? Ha ha ha. Well, no more joking. So the exceptions that happen in your application should be handled some way, and ideally they would be logged, which in the Glee2 backend they definitely are logged. Many times your application needs to somehow let the user know or the requester know in the front end what happened with the exception, what happened, why something didn't work. But you can't just throw an exception out to the front end. You have to communicate that exception somehow. And so we have a bit of infrastructure in our web project that allows you to repackage exceptions and transmit them out to the requester. Now, first, before I get into how that works, if you ever have any kind of exceptional behavior, any kind of thing that is unexpected, abnormal behavior, you should go ahead and throw an exception. This is good because it interrupts the flow in the system. You can throw an exception in the domain, the data layer, the startup, a bootstrapper, inside the API, pretty much anywhere in the application, and it will find its way on up the flow up to the API layer so that it can be logged and handled appropriately. There are times when you need to swallow an exception, and that's okay. That's up to you. You can decide when. You're more than capable of deciding when to make that happen. But when it's an unexpected exception, something that's truly unexpected, abnormal, and you need to notify somehow the front end, then you should go ahead and throw the exception and let it get handled in the front end in the API layer. Sorry. So I'll give you an example. I have here a couple of, let's see, these are a couple of exceptions, but I want to find a different one. I think I've got one over here maybe. Let me actually do this right here. That's the one that I wanted. All right, so this is an exception that is in, yeah, I forgot where it was. This is an exception that I've created in the common exceptions assembly, and it inherits from exception so that you can throw it. But this is an exception that is meant for when we have a command that is we're attempting to dispatch this command, and it goes through a command validator, and the validator is it finds something wrong with the command. You know, some required field is empty, something doesn't match the correct format. We can't have duplicates. Something like that is happening, and so we want to go ahead and throw this. So the exception is, or say the validator itself is going to throw this exception, and then it's going to have on it some validation failures. But it is of this type right here. So now if we were to throw this and it bubble up to the API layer and then go on out to the front end without intercepting it, then ASP.NET Core is going to repackage it into a backend error, then with an error code and everything, but it's going to put a 500 on it, which is a server error, just like a generic server error. It doesn't tell the front end what happened, why it happened, how they can fix it. It doesn't give them any helpful information. So in this case, I want to have a way to whenever this exception is encountered, I want to repackage that as a 400 kind of error. So let's see what happens. I've got this validation renderer, which is it implements the iException renderer, and all it does is it has two methods on it. One is should handle, and the other is render. Now, as you can imagine, the should handle is a method that helps us pick which renderer to use. And so if the exception is a command validation exception, then it will actually use this renderer. And then when it renders it, when it finally finds one of these exceptions, then it will basically build a response and build it this way. So it's going to be an application JSON response. It's going to be a bad request code. It's going to carry with it Let's see. It's gonna carry with it a list or an array of errors, which is this validation failures. It's going to serialize that into JavaScript. And so it basically is, like I said, it's repackaging that exception here into a JSON valid JSON HTTP response. Here's another one. This is for bad requests. So if there's there's a bad request exception somewhere in our system, and we throw it, then it's going to repackage basically the entire exception into a valid HTTP response right here. You can see it's going with a bad request. It's going as JSON. It is going to go ahead and serialize that inner object. And so this right here, this exception handler middleware, this is where this magic is happening. So a middleware in ASP.NET Core is going to intercept the HTTP request as it comes in and as it goes out, and is going to invoke different things. So our command, or sorry, our constructor on this middleware has an argument that takes in a list of renderers. And because we're using dependency injection, the fact that we have exception renderers in our system that implement this interface, they will just automatically get added at when we instantiate this middleware. It'll just add those right here. So we've got that list of renderers, and so then when we invoke this, we're sending in the context, and so that way we know, or we can wrap this in a try catch, so that when there's an exception inside of this context, then we know we can catch it here. We know when it happens, and we can go ahead and react to it. So so here in this case we're going to find the first of those renderers that matches the should handle. Remember that should handle method, where if it's the right type or whatever conditions it has, it's going to find the first one. And if it can't find one, it's just going to go ahead and log the error and then handle the exception without any kind of rendering. Now, if it does find a renderer, then it will go ahead. It will pass that exception into the render function and return its or apply that to the context. So basically, this is where it repackages the exception, and this is where it simply returns the 500 error. Here's where it is right here. The code is the internal server error, and it's repackaging that as an application JSON. So this is how our system is intercepting and repackaging exceptions. So the next time you have or you're expecting or sensing some sort of unexpected or abnormal behavior, you should go ahead and raise that exception, and then if you want to make sure that it goes out to the client with sensible information and a good HTTP code, then just build yourself a renderer here and it will automatically start working.